If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this, what creepy paranormal thing that's happened to you that you still think about to this day? When I was about 6 years old, I lived in an old house that was just opposite the village church. I'd never had any other experiences in this house, and I never would again, but I woke up in the middle of the night because I could hear someone walking across my room very slowly, like they didn't want to be heard. Now, my mom often worked late and would come and say goodnight when I was asleep, but she'd have the hall light on or her room light on so she could see. But this was total dark. The footsteps came right up to the side of my bed and stopped. After about 30 seconds I started to relax because it's an old house and stuff creaks. And then I got kissed on the left side of my cheek. And I screamed. My mom woke up and came storming, asking what was going on and was I okay, so I tried to explain. We moved 1 year later and she won't talk about it, but it leads me to believe that wasn't the only thing that happened. My in-laws live in a very rural area, with a high, steep hill in the back. There's a rock path for the power trucks. I decided to go hiking up it. You have to pass a few houses by a small pond before you start the hill. When I got to the pond, this big white dog, some kind of pit bull / retriever mix, jumped out into the path and started barking and snarling. I figured that was its territory, and I didn't want to go up the path bad enough to get bit. It started jogging towards me, barking the whole way as I was backing off. I knew better than to run, so I willed myself to stand there and just talk quietly. It ran up to me, barking and snarling the whole way, then suddenly turned into bestest boy in the world, waggy tail and bumping its head under my hand until I started petting it. It was like a whole other dog. Around this time, this fluffy, mostly black cat walks down from the last house on the pond, comes over and throws himself down at my feet for petting. Okay, this is getting weird. So now that the dog is chill with me, I start going up the path, and the dog follows me. I figure he just wants some more pets, do so, and start walking again. He's right there with me. I literally tell him, hey, okay, I got this, you don't have to follow. He goes a little ways up the path, and keeps looking back at me, making sure I'm following him, sometimes dropping back to walk with me, but then taking the lead again. I kept waiting for the dog to just hit a point and stop once he went out of his territory range, but he just kept with me. At some point, I sit down to rest, look behind me, and holy shit, I've gone a quarter mile up this hill and the cat's been following the whole time. He walks up purring for petting. I kept saying, no, really, it's okay to go back home, I've got this. I get back up, start walking, following the dog, who's been patiently waiting for me. I turn back around, and, yep, cat's still walking along, bringing up the rear. I literally thought, I've got a white dog and a black cat escorting me up this hill like I'm some honored guest. What the hell, did I enter the Fey realm somewhere along the way? Am I about to get some charge or quest? I was rather disappointed that the only thing on top of the hill was just a big circle where trucks turn around. I sat down on a rock, the dog and cat clustered around me for pets and hugs, and then we walked back down the hill, them escorting me back in the same formation the entire way. The cat broke off and went chasing something around the pond when I got back down the hill, but the dog literally escorted me the entire way back to my in-laws' house. I go in and ask my fill about the dog. When he took a moment to start talking, I half expected him to either tell me, A, he has never seen a dog matching that description in the area. B, someone had a dog like that once, but they died a while ago. Nothing quite so dramatic. Dog lived with his owners in the house by the lake at the end of the hill. However, he did say this dog was incredibly aggressive. It had come on their property and tried to bite him several times, and he had no idea why it was so docile around me. I also found out that hill went up over a mile before you hit that turnaround. I was tired and sweaty, sure, but I didn't feel like I'd walked a mile and back. My husband said it sounds like it was straight out of Incredible Journey, and said he'd have had the same weird "am I in a fantasy novel?" feelings. Nearly a year went by before I went back to visit my in-laws. I decided to talk a walk. I see the dog running around chasing someone's little yapping dog, barking up a storm, jumping at people that tried to stop him. He was not playing at all. Then he saw me, broke off, and started running at me growling. I didn't run, braced for possibly having to fight him off, but called out, "Hey, it's me, don't you remember me?" And suddenly, again, he instantly stopped being aggressive and became a good boy, insisting on scritches and hugs. When I went by the house by the pond, the cat came out for petting. I decided to go back up the hill. While the cat broke off pretty early and went back, the dog, again, went with me the whole way, either by my side or trotting ahead and looking back at me to make sure I was following him. We rested at the turnaround for another couple minutes, then he led me back down and all the way back to my in-laws' house. I happened to look out the window right after I got in, and the dog was snarling and growling at my Phil, who was gardening. So, yeah, I don't know what that was about. The dog didn't have a tag and I never heard a name, so I just called it the Fey Hound, because in some mythologies, Fey have white dogs. They moved away about a year ago, and I keep kicking myself I didn't go out there one last time to see if I'd end up with an escort up the hill again. We bought our house a few years back. Fixer-upper, old city house in what is now a bad neighborhood, but was nice back in the day. Bought from the boomer nephew who inherited it from his blind aunt. Fire sale. The same price people pay for a new car, not even a nice one. 3-bedroom with an addition, corner lot. An absolute steal. Upstairs there was a sealed room. When we got it open, it is the size of a very large walk-in closet, low sloped ceiling on one side, a toilet, hooked up, on one end, and behind the toilet it goes into the space behind the closet in the next room, between the closet and the wall where the ceiling slopes too low for the closet. This space is filled with a nest-looking pile of junk, newspapers, old blankets, old toys. Next to the toilet on the small DIY platform it is on is a faded blue toy dog, clearly very old, 70s or earlier, clearly deliberately placed facing the door. The lock to the room is on the outside. We just said nope and sealed it the fuck back up. Didn't touch a thing. It's right above my office. I finish up in my office and go to bed before 10 every night, because that's when I start hearing footsteps above me. Better than having to pay rent. In 1980 we lived in Maryland in an old shore home, very small. I have always been a night person, so one night after my son and hubby were asleep I made a sandwich and set it on the table. My cat wanted out so I let him out the back door. Turned around and went back to the table, no more than about 12 feet away and the sandwich was gone. Couldn't have been more than a few seconds. We had a dog that was asleep in the bedroom with my husband and our son was sound asleep in bed. I checked them to make sure no pranking going on. I was so scared, I checked the fridge and had used the lunch meat, the knife with mustard was in the sink. I was so confused I just sat at the table looking at the empty plate. I was afraid to pick it up and put it in the sink but I did and went to bed. Have never forgotten this or figured it out. I had one more incident of a disappearing drink that reappeared, then these incidents ended, but I kept the plate as a souvenir. One day I was biking in the woods. A not well-known path which had no end and didn't lead anywhere, so there are normally no people there. A friend showed me it once. We often rode our bikes there together, but only on the parts we knew. When I was alone I started exploring it. One day I had explored everything. Everything to this point we always drove to. I once said we should drive a bit further because I am interested, and my friend was very nervous and said no. I asked why and he said he doesn't want to. I knew something was wrong. So when I had explored everything before this point I decided to drive further. I found a place which I would describe as mystical, but also it had like a bad aura. I felt someone present and something standing on the other side of the river. It was tall and just black. It was a bit foggy around it. The next moment it was gone. I thought that was weird and kept exploring the woods. From this point on I felt observed. And I felt something like a bad aura. As mentioned before, I do not believe in paranormal things, but this was something different. I came back to the place later and saw this thing again. But way closer this time. I felt death. It sounds weird, but I felt death. I rode home as quickly as possible. The feeling of death didn't stop. I started to cry. When I was outside of the woods it vanished. I didn't visit the woods for weeks. One day I went there with my friend. We drove to this point like we always did. As we got closer I felt death again. I smelled death. Death surrounded me. Anyways, I asked my friend to drive further. He got nervous again and said no. I knew he has expired the same. And I said I was there alone. He looked at me and I said yes, I feel it too. We hopped on our bikes and drove home. I have never been there since. When I was in college I worked part-time for campus security, making rounds throughout the night to the various buildings. I was supposed to enter and check each building, except for one building in a remote corner of the campus. This was an old mansion acquired by the college, and although the word haunted wasn't used, enough weird things happened in it, like papers flying around in a mini tornado in the Xerox room with no windows open, that several security guys had quit rather than go in there in the dead of night. So we only had to walk around the outside of this building, checking for open windows, unlocked doors and lights left on. One night I did my first couple of patrols, and nothing was amiss. Then sometime after midnight I returned again to this building, and there was a light on in a second-story window. I checked all the doors and windows around the outside, all still locked. So I unlocked a door, went in, climbed the curved Victorian staircase to the second floor, and proceeded to open each door along the hall where the light should have been coming from. No light. I went back outside, there was a light on in the window. And I was sure the room was along the hall. I checked. I radioed the campus dispatcher and reported this, and he said, "Go back in, check it again." So being stupid and really needing the near minimum wage I was getting, I went back in. I went in every room. No lights were on one was in there. Came back out. A light was on. The next morning I quit the job, and another story entered the campus lore. Me and 7 of my friends went to this friend's vacation house in Baguio City, a popular mountainous vacation spot in the Philippines. Around midnight, 4 of my friends stayed in the second floor for some drinks while me and 3 others stayed in the third floor and were getting ready for bed. One of the guys all of a sudden jumped up from the bed and held his 2 hands up, swearing to us that he saw something/someone on the stairs. Long story short, the 8 of us began packing up together, going down the stairs floor by floor together and switched off the lights floor by floor together. We got out of the house all relieved and getting ready to drive the fuck out when this caretaker walked up to us and said, "If you guys are leaving, then when didn't you guys bother switching off the lights?" Like a scene from a movie, the 8 of us looked up all at the same time and saw a red light shining bright from the window on the third floor. I'll never ever forget that scene. I can't be sure when my childhood home was built, but due to the shag carpet my best guess could be the 70s. I lived there for about 14 years, and although I'm still skeptical, I wish I wasn't, but there just hasn't been enough proof for me. I experienced a few odd things that I can't explain other than maybe an overactive child's mind. I'll share the 2 most odd ones. Like most kids, I was terrified of 2 main things. The dark, and my eerie closet. The way it was set up initially was those folding open outward doors on it. Now, because my room was situated above the basement furnace, the chimney ran right through the closet. It left about 6 inches of room on the right of it, and a few feet on the left of it. It also had 2 shelves that were higher up that I never grew tall enough to reach while living there. I recall that for years I would have these awful nightmares about someone hissing at me from the top shelf, or hiding in the 6-inch crevice on the other side. I religiously kept those doors shut anytime the lights were off, and also kept my door open so the hallway light would come in. I think at some point my closet door must have broken and my dad replaced them with sliding doors. This terrified me because they were much quieter now and very easy to move. One morning, I woke up to see a black dog curled up on the floor of my closet with the door open. It was too early for my sleepy child brain and I had just rolled over to fall back asleep. Something else to know is that I grew up with the sweetest black lab mix, so I thought she has somehow just gotten into the closet to sleep. Sometime later that morning I woke up again, and my closet door was closed. I went to my mom because obviously she closed the door after Puppy woke up and asked if she slept in there all night. My mom was clueless as to what I was asking, and told me Puppy was sleeping in the mudroom with the gate up. At this point Puppy was a bit older, no chance she'd jump that gate. I went to my closet, and taking up all of the room on the floor was my white laundry basket. Truthfully, I've never been nervous or scared of this event, even at the time. If anything, I feel calm thinking about it. The only thing I ever felt uneasy about was that after that night, there was an odd red/brown stain on the chimney that never came out, and was never there before. Sometimes as a special treat, my sister and I were allowed to sleep in the living room together and watch TV to fall asleep. One of her friends had come to stay a few days, so we all camped out in front of the TV. Eventually we all fell asleep. Sometime in the night, while it was still pitch black outside, I woke up really suddenly and I saw a figure cross from the basement, through the living room, and out the unopened front door. I would call it a shadow person, but it was almost like TV static, in the shape of a human. The only thing is it couldn't have been the TV at all. Not only were we watching cable so it wouldn't have gone fuzzy, but my dad always set a time for it to turn off after a certain time, and it was dark when I woke up. Still not sure what happened. When I was a kid, like 7-ish years old, I would often see pictures on frosty windows. And I'm not talking about the "hey, that cloud looks like a whale" type of thing. The frost drawings were always very clear, and had an obvious subject. They were always pirate themed. The one I saw most often was of a wrecked pirate ship, which I would see on the bus every frosty morning going to school. One time another kid even asked me if I drew that, and I, being the honest elementary schooler I was, said of course I did, so I knew other people could see it too. Now, I would assume that someone else was drawing those pictures, and since they were on the bus window, that would make sense, but things get weirder. I also saw frost drawings in my house on the second-story window, where nobody would have been able to reach. The drawing I saw there was of a map stuck in the sand, and a dotted line leading to an X. This is the first time I told anything about this to my mom. I showed her the window and asked if she saw it too, to which she just shrugged and said sometimes we all see pictures in frost. It's obvious now that she didn't see what I saw, but her explanation was vague enough that at the time, I thought these pictures were normal. I spent a long time wondering how Frost knew how to draw such clear pictures, until we moved somewhere else and I stopped seeing them entirely. One day, when I was 18, my mom told me a rumor that the previous resident of that house buried treasure somewhere on the property sometime before he died. The only explanation I can think of for why I kept seeing pirate stuff on the windows is that he was the one making those pictures, trying to tell me there was treasure buried and trying to get me to look for it. I know it's a far-fetched explanation, but I have yet to think of any other reason behind it. When I was about 14, my parents had gone on holiday and left me and my brother at home. We were sat watching TV, and without even processing the words or having any control over it, I said, "Mom and Dad have been in a car crash." Straight after I said it, I had absolutely no idea why I had done this. It felt like it wasn't me saying it. My brother looked at me like a piece of shit, like I was telling a really bad taste joke, but about a minute later the phone rang and they had been in a crash. They were not seriously hurt, thankfully. Also, sometimes I have these dreams that make me feel very ill. They hardly ever happen and they are hard to explain, but last time one did was about 5 years ago. I had just moved house to a new area. I had this very strange dream about a grandmother and grandson feeding ducks near the water, and he fell in. She jumped in to get him out, but she couldn't pick him up enough to push him out of the water. It was about a meter deeper than their head. She was trying to push him, but she wasn't strong enough. It was so clear and vivid. I woke up shaking, my heart beating out of my chest and crying. I felt so traumatized, it was horrible. The next morning I went to work and on the radio it said the exact thing I had seen in my dream had happened that night, just a few villages along, and that they had both died. My blood ran cold and I still think of it to this day. I feel like I witnessed their deaths. Was working for my girlfriend's parents in rural Mississippi, and the local police called the family business and said they need someone to come meet them at my girlfriend's parents' house. I went with my girlfriend's dad to talk to the police because his English wasn't very good. We got there and there was 2 officers and they asked if we were the ones who called. I told them no, we had all been at work and no one was even there. They said a dispatcher had gotten a call from the house's landline and it sounded like someone just running and screaming and crying. Well, the house didn't even have a landline. We go walking up the driveway and I see in the carport that the attic door is open and the ladder to the attic on the door is fully unfolded. At this point we're all scared shitless, the cops included. I'm like, "Y'all got guns, go look up there." They legit were like, "Nah man, fuck that." So I tell them to give me a gun and I'll look up there. Of course they wouldn't. They gave me a flashlight and I grabbed a hatchet and was basically ready to hack down whatever or whoever I saw. I look up in the attic and I'm screaming like a crazy person to intimidate whatever is in there, but the attic was completely empty. We searched around the house, all in all the entrances were locked. We looked for footprints and checked the woods behind the house. Went inside the house and everything was fine. Shit was weird. Like a week later, the dispatcher who answered the call came into the family business. She explains the phone call. It was like a teenage girl screaming, crying, and laughing, and it sounded like she was running. We tried to look up the history of the house and found nothing. Shortly after, my girlfriend's dad died rather abruptly. Her mom felt weird being in the house alone and moved out with the quickness. We found out later a family moved into the house and they just abandoned the house and left town after like a week. When I was a kid, like 8 years old, I lived in a neighborhood that was next to a cemetery. The neighborhood was shaped like an H and we lived on the right side of the H, furthest from the cemetery. I was taking a bath and my cats always were closed in the bathroom with me when I took a bath. My parents always closed them in there because they didn't want to deal with them. I see both my cats looking at something near the door, then look across the room, then straight at me. I had a bottle of shampoo and a soap bottle on the rim of the tub between me and them. Both bottles go flying, one hits the ceiling, the other hits the shower head. One cat is on the toilet maybe 4 feet away, the other is on the counter beside the toilet probably almost 6 feet away. I screamed and my parents come running and keep telling me it was the cats that did it. Both cats are sitting in their exact same spots and neither of them will move at all. Both appeared deathly terrified, as was I. We would pass the cemetery when we would go to my grandparents' house and I would see people there that my parents never seemed to see. Another time, I was 23 and pregnant. We lived about 45 minutes to the nearest town and my husband and I decided to go for a drive. It was probably about 9:30 p.m. when we left. I had horrible insomnia while I was pregnant. We lived in the state line and chose to drive into the other state, where I grew up, but about an hour away. We drove through town and we just took random roads. We were just talking and listening to music. We turned down one road next to the mountain, There's only one true hill that could be considered a mountain in this town. The mountain used to be used for army training in the area, and I am really into history, so we were trying to see if we seen anything that remained from the 40s when the training took place. We drove down a ways, didn't see anything, and figured we would go up a ways and turn around. Since we really didn't know the area, we drove at least 2 more miles with nowhere to turn around. We get close to this one house that is pretty close to the road, and we both got a really bad feeling as we passed it. After the house, we went under the railroad tracks and decided to cut a U-turn because the bad feeling we had. We have to drive past the house again, and the air in the car changes. It feels hard to breathe, it gets freezing cold. We live in the south, so we had the AC on, but it got cold enough we could see our breath. Neither of us said anything, but I knew something was in the car with us. I could feel whatever it was in the back seat. I didn't say a word. My husband looks in the rear view and gasps, but also refused to say anything. He starts crying. We have been married 10 years and I have only seen him cry this one time. He doesn't even know he's crying. Our radio goes out, but sometimes that happens out in the country. So I point out to him that he's crying, and then I tell him I know it's in the car behind me. He looks at me confused, knowing I have no mirror and I have not turned around, and I tell him I can just feel it. Around this time, whatever it is pulls me against the back of the seat, like when someone in a sports car accelerates fast, but I couldn't pull myself off the seat. It finally lets go and does it to him. He slows down significantly because it's making it hard to drive. Eventually it lets him go as well. After a few minutes it feels like it's climbing in my lap. You can full on see my jeans moving as if someone got into my lap, and it starts touching his face. At this point we are probably 10 minutes from town, so he guns it. I tell him not to go home, we need to go somewhere else. I was scared whatever it was would follow us home if we went there. We pull into the Walmart parking lot, very well lit area, and it is in the back seat again. I turn around and can just see this black shadow. We get out of the car and walk around the Walmart for 2 hours because we are scared it will still be in our car when we get back. The town was so small, the super Walmart was not 24 hours at the time, and they close at midnight, so they more or less run us out of the store. It was gone when we got back in the car. You couldn't feel it anymore. It's hard to describe how it felt, but it was just evil and oppressive. We stayed in the parking lot another 30 minutes, scared to drive off. We finally head home. We drove home with no incident. We told our friends and my family about it, and my mom wanted to go out there. I refused for 2 months, then only would go in the light of day, as we were both terrified. Nothing happened when I went with my mom, but my friends begged me to take them. I refused, but told them the general area vaguely enough they could not find it. I don't know what was in our car that night or what happened at that house, but I will never go back there again, but especially at night. I hope to never experience whatever that was again, never. My friend has 2 cats. She took one of them to the vet while I watched over Moofy. Moofy has a habit of whining for food every night at 3 a.m. and my friend gives in every time. I warned my friend not to spoil her or else the habit continues, but she never listens. Back to the story, I was laying on the sectional couch and heard Moofy whine for food. Since I was alone with her, I was going to show that I can't be bargained with. This goes on for some time and she gets frustrated. Suddenly the couch rocked back and forth as if a strong person was pushing and pulling it. Then she quickly burst from under the couch and hopped her 2 front paws up on the couch to face me with widened eyes I've never seen before, as if to say, "You are feeding me." I was paralyzed with fear. She casually walked to the kitchen where I followed and fed her. I returned to the couch and kinda buried what happened and tried to forget it. No one believes me. I am not schizophrenic or on drugs. I have never experienced this before in my life. I can't possibly explain it. I'm a strong guy but struggle to move the couch even with no one laying on it. How can a fat, weak cat who's always bullied by the other cat able to do it rapidly? It was a quick forward and back motion that would require a strongman bodybuilder. This happened 3 years ago and I'm still bothered by it every day. I was 10 years old and my mom let me stay home while she picked up my sister from an after-school activity. Our house had 3 floors and I was on the very bottom floor playing on the computer. There was a bathroom around the corner and I got up to use it. While I was in there, the front door opened. I knew it wasn't my mom or dad just based on how they walked in. My dad would always take off his work boots and my mom would set down the baby carrier or something similar. I was immediately scared and hid myself between the washing machine and the wall while I listened to this unknown person walking around upstairs. I could hear them rummaging through drawers and slamming them, walking around the kitchen/living room area. My mom finally came home and I bolted up the stairs to tell her someone had broken into the house. She searched the house but no one was there. She even said the door was shut and locked when she came in. I never heard anyone leave. It was like those footsteps just stopped as soon as she walked in. So my mom's house is seriously creepy, and I'm pretty sure that some people have died there. The place is well over 2 centuries old, after all, and there are a lot of inexplicable things that happen there, such as doors randomly closing behind people, random scraping and thumping noises that stop abruptly when you start looking for a source, and the digging noises coming from the basement. It has a dirt floor. Anyways, one day my brothers and I were bored and wanted to go exploring around the house. Old houses have a lot of odd nooks and crannies, and for some reason decided to start with the basement. Now, my mom's basement has several cellars for some reason that no one ever goes near, and we decided to go in one of those. As soon as the 4 of us entered the cellar, the door swung shut behind us, and a bright flash of light appeared in front of our eyes. It took the form of a screaming face, and we panicked. Another thing about the cellars is that they don't have built-in lights because they're so old. We hadn't bothered with bringing a light because the hallway has lights and we weren't exactly anticipating the door shutting on us. So anyways, that ended with the 4 of us scrambling up the stairs, stumbling and swearing along the way. We never talk about it, and neither me or my brothers, to my knowledge, have ever set foot in one of those cellars again. When I was 15, I was watching TV till I was ready to go to sleep. I turned my TV off, snuggled up in my blanket, and tried to sleep. I heard scratching behind the headboard of my bed, kinda like mice going through the walls, and it was loud enough to where I couldn't go to sleep, so I knocked on the wall and it disappeared, but only for a couple of minutes. This happened for what seemed like 30 minutes until I heard like a cracking noise. Kinda like wood cracking when it's breaking. I looked up to my top left-hand corner of my room behind me and saw this figure crawling from inside the wall and towards me, exactly like the monster/antagonist of the movie The Frighteners. I literally feel chills going down my body. I jumped up off my bed and turned on my lights, and it was gone. The room was silent. I stood up for another hour convincing myself I was hallucinating. After that I decided to try to go to bed again. Not long after, everything started to happen like it did before, except this time I didn't wait until I saw a figure and just jumped to turn my lights on, and I didn't sleep for the next 2 days. The only explanation I can think of is that this happened to me because I took this fossilized Native American pendant from the creek that was behind my neighborhood and kept it in my room. Obviously because I did this, more stuff actually happened, but this one took the cake for fuck this shit in my lifetime. So I put it back in the creek and I haven't been bothered since then. I was doing a cross-country trip, FL to OR. I was supposed to stop in Vegas and head out the next morning. For some reason, it didn't occur to me that I was going way out of the way until it was too late. I called my husband because he set up the reservations and the stops. He wanted me to have fun, so he put me in Old Town to get some gambling in before sleep. I had one of those days where everything went wrong. I don't have good night vision, so I try to drive dawn to dusk. I encountered a bunch of issues and rolled into Vegas at 10:30 p.m. My room was a corner room right next to the Old Town experience. Just lights and music every 20 minutes until 2 or something in the morning. I tried to sleep. I tried so hard. I could not. I was crazy tired and thought, I'll drink 2 5-hour energy drinks and make my next stop that's 5.5 hours away. I'll nap and relax all day and night and then get up fresh to finish my trip. The minute I left Vegas residual lights, I was the only vehicle, in pitch darkness, driving over canyons. There were no lights and no people. Occasionally a car would break the monotony, but it was just me in 4 lanes in pitch black. Just beyond the spot where the lights reach, I saw all manner of tentacles and other giant, lanky things that moved just in the darkness and kept pushing back from the light. There was nothing out there. It was either empty canyon drop-offs or flat desert land. There was no vegetation except tumbleweeds, and they aren't dangly. I made it to my hotel and chalked it up to lack of sleep, caffeine overload, and stupidity. Don't do this. It was so dumb. I never got my sleep patterns right the rest of that trip, which just makes it more dangerous. I told my hubby about the tricks my brain was playing on me, and we just let it go and kind of sighed a sigh of relief I didn't kill me or someone else. A few years later, I was coming back from another trip through Vegas back to OR. I got in no problem and left no problem. I got about 2 hours out of Vegas and every light and buzzer went off on the panel of my car. The car drove fine, but it was weird and I couldn't get through to my husband. I was right at a little desert town and pulled over. Waze took me to a AAA gas station that looked like something out of a horror film. I pulled up and a guy came out and watched me. I put it in reverse and backed out. I got my husband finally, and as I was getting on the highway it happened again. I told my husband to track my phone and I was gonna try to make it to the next town and to send help if he didn't hear from me or I didn't call soon, but not from the place I left. Everything calmed down and reset at the next town when I stopped for gas. I got home and got my car checked, and the Honda guy said every warning system tripped but nothing was wrong with the car. This was my car. The first trip was a rental car. I am getting to where I kind of don't want to drive through Nevada alone anymore. About 10 years ago I started having the same dream over and over again. It lasted for about a month, and while it didn't happen every night, I had it at least a few times a week. In the dream, I'd walk through a door and turn around and find a dog sitting in the corner of the room. I could tell the dog was scared and lonely, so I'd go and pet it. That's when the dream would end. Cut to a few weeks later. I woke up and got ready for work. It was the coldest day of the year so far at about -25°C. I got my coat and boots on and left through the side door of my apartment building, and as I pushed the door open I already knew what was going to happen. I opened the door, stepped out, and turned around. And sitting in a little shivering ball, pushed up against the wall of the building, was a small brown dog. She looked absolutely terrified. We looked at each other and I swear to God we both recognized each other. Like, there was no hesitation. I walked to her and she immediately raised her head to me. I petted her head and grabbed her collar, which I would never normally do with a dog I didn't know, and led her back into my warm apartment. She happily followed. My wife was there and was obviously confused about why I came back home 30 seconds later with a new dog, but she saw how cold the dog was and agreed we couldn't leave her outside. We called the animal shelter, and after a few hours they called us back and told us that the dog's owners had been looking for her. She had escaped in the night somehow and traveled halfway across town on the coldest night of the year. Turns out her name was Bonita. We reunited her with her grateful family and all was well. But I can't help feeling that fate brought us together for that single moment. The dreams, the immediate recognition, the happy reunion. I don't normally believe in things like that, but it definitely felt like it was meant to happen. And I'm cool with that. A couple of years ago, my mother and I were driving to another state to see my aunt. It's a 3.5-hour drive that we've taken dozens of times before. We know the exits, the rest areas, gas stations, practically everything about the stretch of freeway we always take, but this was the first time my mother and I went alone. We had already gotten gas, stopped at a rest area, and gotten gas again. We were good to go until we crossed the border. But not 30 minutes after the last gas station we stopped at, the gas light comes on. I knew that was impossible unless there was a sudden leak. The next closest gas station I knew was another 45 minutes out, so we wouldn't be able to make it unless we want to risk getting stranded. I pulled up the GPS and found one in the next exit. There was no info about it, not even pictures, which I found weird, but we were desperate. I pull off the next exit and there's only one little stretch of road, and maze as far as I can see. The stalk stretched very high up, and the only thing guiding me were the headlights. When the corn stalks finally ended, we saw a little gas station and some building pushed together up ahead. I pull over and we immediately realize it's all boarded up. Every building is boarded up but the pumps had working screens. And there was a guy across the street leaning against an old car smoking. I remember feeling him stare at me but feeling too scared to look him in the eyes. My mom wanted to get down to get gas but I had a bad feeling. So I got down instead and tried to swipe my credit card and get gas as fast as possible. But it wasn't reading the card. I kept swiping and nothing was coming up on the screen. I'm about to straight up fist fight this machine when I get this horrible feeling that washes over me. I immediately got in the car and locked the doors. My mom was yelling at me cause I didn't get gas, but I just knew we had to get the hell out of there. I drove back onto the freeway. The whole time I'm trying to explain to my mom what happened and she's yelling at me for being vague. And then we both looked at the gas gauge and it was 3/4 full. It was as if nothing had happened. We were quiet the rest of the way there. And we reached my aunt's without having to stop for gas again. Since then we'd made the same trip several times. And each time when we try to find this little town with a haunted gas station, pump 6, but we haven't. The exit doesn't even exist. It goes from one exit to the other, and skips the weird exit in the middle that we went into. It's still one of the creepiest things I've seen and I have no explanation for it. First house I bought was about 150 years old. Used to always hear weird noises but didn't think much of it. When I got my dog he slept in his kennel in the mudroom most of the time by choice. Reason being he always freaked out when he slept in my room. I never knew why but he would wake up growling and whining, staring down the empty corner of the room. It freaked me the hell out all the time but didn't know what to do about it. It usually lasted about 10 seconds or so and then he would go back to sleep or leave the room and go to his kennel in the mudroom. About a year after I got him I was in my room with my GF when he walked in and laid down in the spare bed I kept for him there. After a few minutes he suddenly jumped at the corner, started barking and losing his shit. He kept turning around and looking at me and whining, and then turning back to the corner and barking and growling like a rabid dog. This went on much longer than normal. We got up off the bed and walked out of the room, with him slowly backing out of the room too, not taking his eyes off of the corner. Once we were all out of the room, I closed the door to the bedroom and he stopped. This then proceeded to happen 4 to 5 times over the course of 7 years. I eventually sold the house, and to get it ready I was doing some electrical work in the basement. There was a crawl space underneath the bedroom where I needed to replace some wiring. When I crawled into the crawl space, I could see, half buried underneath a bunch of rocks and rubble, there was a rotted mattress with metal rusted springs and knotted rope twisted around it as though something had been tied to the now rotted away mattress. Once I saw it, I realized it was directly underneath the corner of the room that caused my dog to freak out. I decided to skip the wiring and got the hell out of there. Needless to say, I am thankful to be living somewhere else now. Just goes to show you. Animals pick up on a lot more than we do. Friends' parents were away on holiday, so a group of us, 20 years olds at the time, were staying at the house. One night everyone wanted to go clubbing. I hate clubbing and had some studying to do, so decided to stay back at the house. At around 1 a.m. I hear this blood-curdling scream coming from outside the window. It was horrible. I was frozen in my tracks at one end of the house. I sprinted to the kitchen and grabbed a knife, and the screaming got louder and more pain-filled. I remember screaming back, "I'm getting goosebumps just reliving this in my head," and then there was silence. I was 20, and I was so scared. I got to the garage through an internal door, got into my car and drove to the nearest petrol station to calm down and try to make sense of what happened. As I get to the petrol station, I see my friends. They had just got out of a taxi on their way home from the nightclub. They were buying snacks to consume back at the house. They took one look at me and asked me what was going on, as I was very pale. I explained everything, and they hopped in the car with me and we went back to the house. When we get to the house, they check the gardens before we go into the house and they see nothing. We go in the house, sit down, and one of my friends says, "Have you ever noticed that all the bedroom doors used to have locks on the outside?" That was enough for me. I checked out and went straight home. I was on a cross-country trip to California from Maryland with my cousin and her 2 friends. I can't remember exactly what state we were passing through, but it was pitch black and a long straight road. My cousin had a little Ford Fiesta we were all shoved into, and the headlights were shit and low to the ground, so the road was not that lit up in front of us, maybe a good 50 feet and so light. I was driving and my cousin's friend Erica was in the passenger seat. The other 2 were asleep in the back, so we were the only ones that saw. I was driving along, and right in the middle of both lanes on this long middle of nowhere road, I just saw legs appear in the light out of nowhere, close enough that I swerved to miss them. It all happened so fast, but it looked like it belonged to a deer or a moose or something. The only thing was there was something off about them. It looked like light-colored deer legs, except I couldn't see the body, or if I could it was just the bottom of it, enough that I didn't notice. So all I see is just these 4 towering legs standing completely still in the middle of the road, like it stopped to take a break and didn't even move when I swerved around them. By the time we passed it and tried to look back, I couldn't see anything. I just remember asking her if she saw that too and what that was, and we were both super confused. I still get this unnerving feeling when I imagine it, just these tall legs placed awkwardly close together for how tall they must have been for not being able to see a body. I know moose are tall, but they are dark colored, and as far as I know they are not in the Midwest and the plains. But I have also never seen or heard of a deer as big as a moose, so I have no clue what I saw. It always gives me this unnerving feeling when I think about it. I used to live in an old barn that had been converted into 2 flats, apartments. It only took a few nights of me living there to realize that strange things were happening. Half of my stuff was unpacked and half still needed to be done. Me and my GF were asleep when my CD player came on with a song that starts off with bells chiming and wolves howling, some 41 intro track. I get up confused to turn it off but couldn't find it. It hadn't even been unpacked yet and wasn't even plugged in. GF never stayed in on her own after that. If I fell asleep on the sofa, a very aggressive voice would scream, what felt like right next to my ear, my name, telling me to get bed. It would wake me up and I would stumble to bed. When I was in bed and asleep, I would be woken by a different voice, but this time it was calm. It would say my name and tell me it's okay to sleep now, go to sleep. I lived on my own and always fell asleep on the sofa watching TV. It happened too often for it to be one of those things you hear just as you're dozing off. Twice or maybe even 3 times, I can't be sure, I'd done the dishes and left them on the side of the sink to dry. I went about my day, work etc., go to put the dishes away and the cups and glasses had been turned from upside down to the right way up. As I said, I lived on my own and no one else had a key. Never really got a bad vibe, but it would certainly make me think. The flat was open plan and I could see my bedroom and my bedroom window from my living room chair. My neighbor had a dim outside light that would be on all night and would light up that part of the window a little bit. Apart from that, it was pitch black in there. I normally shut the door as I've been creeped out by feeling something watching me from that pitch black room before. But it was open this night and I didn't even notice TBH, until something just caught my eye. As I looked up, the room was dark except for a silhouette that was being lit up by the neighbor's porch light. As soon as I noticed it, it stood for about 2 seconds then kind of just moved out the way, which let more light into the room. I freaked a bit, went to close the bedroom door, and the temperature just dropped as soon my hand hit the door handle. That one really got me. Being watched is a fear of mine. Don't know why. Not really creepy, but unexplained. When I was little, around 4 or 5, in the early 60s, we lived in an apartment complex in SF that had a wooded area behind the complex. I was playing WA friend and we were looking into the wooded area and both saw what we described as a white gorilla walking through the trees. Our parents didn't believe us, but we were 100% convinced that's what we saw. I can still remember it clearly. It was similar in size and build to that famous picture of Bigfoot, but white. We moved soon after, but went back 30 years later to the funeral of one of my parents' friends. The guy I'd been playing with that day came up to me and one RST thing he said was, "Do you still believe in the white gorilla?" I do. No idea what it was, but we both saw something. One night in the late 70s we lived on a busy corner in a semi-rural area. We were just sitting around visiting with some friends. My friend said something unimportant, don't remember what, and I immediately said the cops are going to be here in a minute. I could see the blue lights flashing through the windows. As soon as I said that, there was an accident right in front of our house, and within minutes there were emergency vehicles everywhere, and you could see the lights through the windows. One of the 2 psychic experiences of my life. I dreamed about my dog before I got him, and his name was Henderson in the dream. A customer at the bar I worked at gave him to me as a surprise and said his name was Bear. He was the dog in my dream, his name is Henderson. That was 15 years ago.